The U.S. orders a Chinese consulate to close as consulate staff burn classified papers. A Chinese ambassador is lost for words when asked about Uyghur concentration camps. And happy anniversary of murdering people. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Surfshark. You should be using a VPN like Surfshark to protect yourself whenever you go online. So, people knew something was up when an unusual number of fire trucks showed up outside the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas this week. Since it is Texas, my first thought was the Chinese consulate was having an outdoor barbecue. But it was much less fun than that. Consulate staff were burning classified documents.
Reports of someone burning classified documents at the Chinese consulate. A source tells us the consulate is being evicted by 4 p.m. this Friday. Neighbors called 911 saying they spotted someone burning those documents in the courtyard, but when Houston firefighters arrived, they were not allowed on the property.
Obviously, the burning question here is, what happened to the consulate's paper shredders? But after the document burning, it was confirmed that the U.S. is ordering the Chinese consulate in Houston to close.
A State Department spokeswoman said China was asked to close the Houston consulate, quote, in order to protect American intellectual property and Americans' private information, but did not give specifics.
I have a feeling that we may never get all of the specifics, at least not officially. But Senator Marco Rubio, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, said the Chinese consulate in Houston was not a true diplomatic facility, but the central node of the Communist Party's vast network of spies and influence operations in the U.S. U.S. law enforcement officials also compiled a document of investigations linked to the Houston consulate. Those include attempts to steal research, to recruit researchers to steal research, and to try to force Chinese citizens whom the Chinese government has deemed as wanted fugitives to return to China. According to David R. Stilwell, the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, China's attempted scientific thefts in the United States had accelerated over the last 6 months and could be related to efforts to develop a vaccine for the coronavirus. The U.S. Justice Department has also accused Chinese hackers of trying to steal research on what could become a cure for the coronavirus. You know, the coronavirus. The deadly virus the Chinese Communist Party tried to cover up, which is why you spent months in lockdown. That coronavirus, which is why I call it the CCP virus. But regardless of why the U.S. government shut down the consulate, the Chinese Communist Party is very upset.
Beijing is threatening retaliation. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson called the request a political provocation.
China strongly condemns such an outrageous and unjustified move which will sabotage China-U.S. relations. We urge the U.S. to immediately withdraw its erroneous decision, otherwise China will make a legitimate and necessary response.
A source with direct knowledge of the matter said China was considering closing the U.S. consulate in Wuhan in turn.
Oh no, the U.S. consulate in Wuhan? The epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak? Gosh, what a devastating loss. Especially since the consulate was closed and the staff evacuated in January. However, as of this recording, some sources are reporting that the U.S. consulate in Chengdu could be shut instead. You know, I would be sad to lose the U.S. consulate in Chengdu. Back in 2012, Wang Lijun, the police chief of Chongqing, escaped to the U.S. consulate in Chengdu. He didn't stay in the consulate for long, but that incident exposed a crazy story of murder, corruption, organ harvesting, and a possible coup. It ended up taking down hugely powerful Chinese Communist Party officials. That story was one of the reasons I started China Uncensored. And here we are 8 years later. But even without their consulate in Houston, China still has 4 consulates in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago, as well as an embassy in D.C. Speaking of Chinese consulates, the one in San Francisco, is apparently harboring a military-linked fugitive scientist. U.S. federal prosecutors have accused the scientist, Tang Juan, of visa fraud for concealing her links to the People's Liberation Army on her visa application. Tang was working as a researcher at the University of California, Davis. But an investigation revealed that she worked at a PLA-affiliated university in China, and she is considered to be active military personnel. After being visited by the FBI in June, Tang fled to the Chinese consulate in San Francisco. You know, I'm starting to wonder what goes on at these consulates. Of course, closing the Houston consulate is just part of the Trump administration ramping up pressure on the Chinese Communist Party. Or, as the New York Times calls it, a blanket anti-China message to appeal to his supporters in recent weeks. Wow, someone must be trying hard to get back into China. But yes, the desperate election bid included blacklisting 11 more Chinese companies that are using Uyghur slave labor or were conducting genetic analyses used to further the repression of Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. It's been called halal organ harvesting, which has absolutely ruined the halal food carts for me. Thank you. But the U.S. pressure on China doesn't stop there. The House voted to ban TikTok on federal devices, mainly because Bernie Sanders' account was getting really painful. And we'll have more China news headlines after the break. Stay tuned.